Okay, hi everybody. This tutorial is going to be about how to render your scenes in 3D Studio Max to allow for better lighting, to allow for you to also render in a wireframe view so that people can see not only the textures and the lighting and everything that you've done better, but also to see how you've modeled it, because they can see the wireframe view as well. You see it a lot in student portfolios that are released each year on YouTube and things like that. The thing that we're looking for is to have that full colored version, like what you're seeing in front, and then to have a camera spinning around the object or the asset, and then for that asset to turn from being in full color to being shaded with a wireframe view. It's really common to see, and it's really helpful for anyone looking at your work to understand how you've modeled it. So to start off with, the first thing that you need to do is to put a make sure that your whatever your scene is, whatever your asset is in the center of the world. The center of the world is always basically the middle of the grid. So you see this grid at the bottom here. The black lines running through the middle, they're actually telling you where the middle of the grid is. So if I just put on see through here, you can see that the black lines form an X in the middle. That's where you want to place your object. Now, the easiest way of doing that, no matter what your object is, so if I just draw a quick teapot in here, if I use my move control and I've got my object selected, down at the bottom here, if I right click any of these spinners, all three of them, then it puts my object slap bang in the middle of the scene. And that's what I've done here with this boat that was designed by Kieran Hutchison, one of our ex-students who's now working at Viewpoint Games. This was an asset that he created for Koali Game Studio, who were after kind of chunky boat designs for their mobile game. So let's crack on. The first thing that you need to do, obviously, is put your asset in the middle of the screen. The next thing is move over to Shapes and choose Circle. And what I'm going to do here is put a camera panning all the way around the object. So I'm choosing Circle from the list under the Shapes drop down under Create Panel in 3ds Max. Hitting T on the keyboard to go to top. And then I'm just going to turn on my snaps tool here, because I want to make sure that my circle is in the center of the world as well. So with the snaps tool turned on, I'm also going to right click it, and I'm looking for it to snap to grid points. Okay. If I wanted it to snap to any part of the boat, I could turn on vertex and it would snap to various parts of the boat. In a minute, I've got it snapped to grid points, so you can see it's popping to each grid point we've got on the screen. So I want the middle grid point, which is there, and then I can click and drag out, and it'll create a circle surrounding the boat. Next thing is I'm just going to jump in and grab a camera, target camera, and then from the left-hand side or from the front, depends where you want to start the camera, it's going to click and drag. And again, I want the target of this camera to ideally be on the grid line, so along that front line, right in the middle, and let go. Coming out of the top view, I'm looking at it in more of a perspective view now, and I can see what the camera is looking at, and basically I can tell that it's looking too short, it's looking too far down. So I'm going to press C on the keyboard, and what that does is it will flick it so that we're looking through the camera's view. You'll notice that my water isn't on the ground plane, isn't on the floor. That's because the boat's on the floor, and I moved the water plane up a little bit so that it would look like it was cutting halfway through the rudder. So here, what I want to do now is I want to grab that line there, which I know is the circle. This is the circle that the camera's looking at. You can see I've highlighted circle there. And I can grab that circle and just lift it up like this, okay? Before I do that, actually, I'm just going to undo that, what I just did there. I'm going to come back into my perspective view. I want to attach my camera to the circle first before I start moving the circle around. So to do that, I want the camera selected. So just select your camera. Let's just turn off snaps for a second. And then press animation in the top drop down at the top. Choose constraints and then to path constraint. And with that selected, you can then choose the line that we want the camera to follow. So it doesn't always have to be a circle. You can have a line that flows in between a few buildings and you want the camera to kind of fly in between them. This is the way you would do it. But I'm going to get it just to follow this circle. So with the camera selected, I'm going to choose the pathway there. Now what will happen is, however long your track bar is at the bottom, so for me it's 250 frames, that's how long it will take the camera to pan all the way around the circle. And it should be fairly linear, so it will continue that, there's no smoothing arcs or anything in the curve editor. It's just a completely linear line, so there's no slow in and slow out as the camera comes to 250 frames or leaves 0. So that's good. Right, so now I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. So I'm looking at it, pressing C on the keyboard and looking through the camera's viewport. Then I can select the circle, and when I start moving that, you'll tell it starts moving the camera, you see, because the camera is attached to it. I also want to move the camera's target, which is also somewhere right down here looking at the middle. So I'm going to press H on the keyboard to choose camera target. Okay, and then I can start moving that up as well. I want the camera target to be roughly in the middle of the boat. And at this point I can see that my camera is probably too close. And remember that the camera is attached to this circle, so if I move the circle up, then we can move the camera up and down. But if I use the scale tool on the circle, then that actually pushes the camera further out. So a combination of those options there allows you to kind of get the camera where you want it. Again, I'm going to move the target a little just to make sure I've got these top sections of the boat are in play. I'm going to move it to around here. The other thing that I want to do, and the thing that you should set up in 3ds Max, is what size are you going to render this out at. So if you go to your render options by pressing F10 on the keyboard, first thing that you want to do is set this so that it's in the active time segment. So we want to go from frame 0 to frame 250. We also have an output size here, and this is what's going to determine the output of the image. So if you want it to be rendered out at 35mm, so standard cinema size, or even 70mm at the IMAX cinema size, and you can do that here. If you just want standard HD, then you click on HD TV at the bottom, and you've got your 720 and your 1080 at the top there. So for the purpose of this small tutorial, I'm just going to render it at a smaller size, so 640 by 480, and it totally depends on how you're going to show this. If you're going to be rendering this off and sending it to companies, then you probably want to go for the HD. It's going to take longer to render because obviously there's more pixels in a HD image than there is in a 640 by 480, but it reaps its rewards when you can see the full HD version at the end. So I'm just going to use 640 by 480, so I'm going to select that there. I've told it I want to be 0 to 200 frames, and then just here in my render output, I want to tell it where exactly I want to save it and what file type I want to use. So in the render output, I'm going to choose files. For me, I'm just going to save it onto the desktop for a minute, and then here I'm going to call it test spin. I'm going to call this one Fuse because it's the one with the full color. So with that done, here in the formats, I'm going to choose QuickTime MOV. If you don't have QuickTime MOV, it will be because you don't have QuickTime on your machine that you're using. And if that's the case, then you can render out at AVI. I think DV is the compression setting that you want for AVI. For QuickTime MOV, which is the one I'm used to using, I use pretty much all the time, I use H.264. It was the old way of rendering out for YouTube. H.264, I think they've now moved over to HTML5 or something. But okay, so this is what I want. I want H.264, frames per second, 30 is fine, and the quality up and over at best. So that's that set up. All I need to do is hit render when I'm ready. So I'm just going to minimize that for a second. The other thing that I want to do is just hold down Shift on the keyboard and press F. And what that does is it shows us safe frames. Safe frames meaning out of all the viewport space that you've got in 3D Studio, not all of it's going to be rendered. Obviously, this viewport size here isn't 640 by 480, yet this box in the middle is. So I can see now how close I can get to my object before it starts leaving the scene at the top or at the bottom. Obviously, I can use my tool at the bottom to kind of rotate around and make sure that the boat's not coming out of the video at any point. And it isn't, and that's fine. So this is my first render, and all I need to do now is just add a little bit of better lighting in here for us to see the scene a bit better. So I'm going to go to my create tool at the top, And then instead of using shapes or standard, I'm just going to go to lights. And instead of photometric, I just want a standard light and I want a skylight. I want it to cast shadows. Here in the raise per sample, if you up that, then you will find that the shadowing looks a lot neater. The lower this is, then the little bit more sort of blurry and blotchy, you'll find the shadows. With the skylight still selected, and it doesn't matter where you put the skylight, I'm just going to hit it and put it right there. And then if we wait a few seconds, you can see that the shadowing kind of happens and it allows for these like nice little ambient shadows and creases inside the object. So that's set up now, that's ready to go. I can just render this scene out. And to do that, I would again press F10 to bring back up the box that I minimized. Everything should still be as it was last time I used it, which it is. It's all still set up. And then I just hit render. As soon as you do that, it will start rendering the scene for you. And it will tell you here how long is remaining. So once it's done one frame, it calculates then, well, if I've got to do another 249 of those, then it's going to take 40 minutes to render the whole thing. So one other thing that I'm not happy about with this render at the moment, and one thing that I don't think anyone should do, is render with a black background. So I'm just going to cancel that. You can hear my computer kicking in. To change that background so that it's not just black, if you just press 8 on the keyboard, then here you've got the option for background. You can import your own map by using bitmap and go and grab your own picture if you like, or you can just choose to go with like a subtle darkish grey. It's much more appealing than black. So that's that, and then I hit render again, and you'll see it'll ask me if I want to overwrite the scene. Yes, I do, and I'm just going to show you the first frame. There you go. So that's more of a neater, if I pause that, it's a neater color than black, and it allows you to kind of focus more on your object and not focus on the vast amount of black in the background. So let's close that, and that's how you render off your first colored version. Okay. So moving on from there, how do you render off the wireframe version? Okay, so the first thing to render the wireframe version is you need to go back into your render settings, so F10, and then scroll right to the very, very bottom, and you'll find Assign Renderer. In there, instead of in the production area here, instead of using the scanline renderer, click these 3 little dots and choose to render using Mental Ray. Okay. With that, obviously you want to change your file name again, because otherwise we're going to overwrite the color one. We don't want to do that because we're going to this time render it as a wireframe. So let's fuse and put in wire and save that. Okay, so now that we've got Mental Ray Renderer set up, the next thing to do is press M on your keyboard, bring up your material editor, choose one of your empty slots that you've got available, and then instead of the standard setup that you've got here, click that and choose composite. Now composite, basically it uses 2 different materials. So it's going to use a base color, so whatever color you want your object to be, and then it'll use a second material to draw the lines on the top. Here it doesn't really matter, you can discard the old material or keep it, it's not important. We can just click on discard. Here's my base material. So my base material, this is the color of the object. So ideally you want it to be a kind of a grayish tone. Okay, you don't want color on there. Next thing, scroll up the stack and then come to material number 1. Material number 1 is the color of your lines of your wireframe. So for me, I'd rather that be black. So I'm going to go scroll all the way up to the top there, make sure it's black, and then I'm going to click this wire button here. And you'll notice if you're looking at the actual texture or the material, that it's grey with black outline, which is exactly what we want. So with that done, what I'm going to do then is just select the boat, and I'm also going to select the water on the floor, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to have this texture by clicking this option here. Now what it'll do is it'll turn your object into a wireframe. It will look like it's see-through. I believe if we change this, it still stays on see-through. I thought it did. So now we're ready to render again, and if I just hit render this time, again, press F10 on the keyboard, and then click render at the bottom. Just make sure that you have saved it as a different file name, otherwise you're going to overwrite the 40 minutes of rendering that you did before for diffuse. So hit render, and you'll see that it's going to draw it quite quickly. the way in which it renders is very different to scanline. So the mental ray uses your your processor and your CPU. So if you've got like 4 or 5 cores, then it will use 4 or 5 of these little blocks here to render. Mine should be using 4. Looks like it's using a bit more, but it should only be using 4. So I'm just going to stop that, and you can see how that's working. So what you'll end up with is 2 different videos, one with wireframe and one that is got the diffuse color. So we're done with 3D Studio Max. There's everything I needed to do. So I'm going to close that now. And I'm going to now open up my Adobe Premiere. Okay. Now I'm just going to delete what I put in here earlier because I was just testing it beforehand. But I've got the same scene here. So here's my diffuse color that I rendered out. And here's my wireframe that I rendered out. Okay. Now they're both using exactly the same animation. And what that means is that we can bring in our diffuse color. We can bring in our diffuse color again. And then we can bring in the wireframe, pop that on the top of that one, and bring our wireframe and put it on the end. Okay, so what we're looking to do is to start with a fully colored version, to change to a see-through, a wireframed version, and then to stay with the wireframe version. So basically, this middle section here, halfway through this point, which would be around here, we're going to switch to a wireframe version. Okay. Now to do that, with your second video channel here, yours may be non-collapsed, so you'll have it will look something like this. Just click on the little arrow at the bottom there, and it will show you the rest of the video. So what you then need to do is click on the pen tool, and anywhere in the video you can click. It doesn't really matter. If you click somewhere in the middle, and then click again. It doesn't really matter because you can slide it left and right anyway. So click again, slide all the way to the left, and then pull down on your mouse. Now what that will do, and we'll be able to see it here, is it will start fading the diffused color version, and it will blend into just seeing the wireframe. Okay, and then it will pan all the way around, see the back of it, and then job done. So this is the look that we're after, and ideally, if you have the video rendered exactly the same diffuse and the wire, then you should have a really clean, smooth transition from one to the other. You can see that I'm going to need to render this section here because I've made some changes to it. So this little red section there can be changed if I go to sequence and render effects in work area. It will then quickly render that sequence. We can see the video spinning here, so you see how long. This might be too long to show one object, but I am just using this as a test to show you how to do it. It's up to you if you want the video to be as long as this or not. So this is 25 seconds worth on one model, which perhaps is too long, I don't know. Okay, so that's that. Next thing, you might want to add your name on it or something like that. You might want to add your name across the entire thing. To do that, it's quite easy. You come up to your title option at the top here, choose new title, and then we just want a default still title. Again, 640 by 480 is correct. I'm just going to call it Mike. Open up a new scene, just like this. And in here, you can choose how you want the thing typed or how you want to see it. So let's say I'm going to put in Mike. That's that. Let's put in a little forward slash boat. Okay, so Mike Acosta's in there, and then I can grab that and move it around. So I can put it in the bottom corner. I can choose it again. I can just shrink it down. I can put it in the top corner, perhaps a little bit more space up there. What I can also do down here is choose any different types, so I can make it look a little bit more jazzy. So we can do something like this. And then, of course, you could also add a second bit of text that could say, I don't know, I think this was 500 tries. Here's a little 500 try model, and again, we'll just scale that down and perhaps use a slightly different font for that bit. Let's choose Actually, I think the same font was a bit nicer. It doesn't really matter, does it? Okay, so there's my 500 try model. Okay, and then I can close that. And over here, you've got that title ready for you to bring into the scene. So if I grab it and put it now on video number 3, so I'm on the next line up, I'm just going to zoom in on that so that I can resize it. Just select it and drag in the opposite direction. Again, you can use the drop down on layer number 3, and we can choose that this thing fades in or fades out. So again, using the pen tool, let's put a dot in somewhere here, let's put a dot in the middle, draw that down, and then at the end, we'll put a dot there and a dot here and draw that one down. So if we just re-render that now, so sequence render effects in work area, and it'll play it, and you can see the Mike Acosta 500 try model comes into view. We'll go all the way through. We've got our change into a wireframe view. Obviously, this is really looking so much more professional than some of the submissions that I've seen this year. And then as soon as it hits this point here, look, the Mike Acosta will start fading out, and then you're on to your next scene. Again, you can choose that your model and everything else fades out at the same time. So we can just put these dots in like that. Again, sequence render effects in work area. And then we'll see again, we're coming from black now, all the way up into seeing it viewed, goes through all of this process. And then at the end, you'll see that everything fades out at the same time. And then you can fade back in with your next model. Okay. So that's how you professionally render your assets and your scenes to look better for your portfolio. And that's the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching.